Let's see. Protect Sports. Thank you for the super chat, Protect Sports. Greatly appreciate you. Protect Sports writes, do you think we trade for a tight end before the deadline? I'm not sure if they do anything tight end related this year. It'll be interesting to see if somebody becomes available and what the asking price is. Again, if they identify a guy that they really like, and let's just go with the OJ Howard or the what's the guy in Cleveland's name? David Njoku. Let's just go with those two in particular because two young, talented tight ends that are on teams that are loaded at tight end right now that could easily be moved on from, getting closer to the end of their rookie deals, and so those are two names that have come up with this football team in recent months. Whether you're talking closer to the draft with OJ Howard or closer to training camp with David Njoku. Those are guys that you're intrigued by. Obviously, they're young, which kind of fits in the timeline of what this Washington football team is moving towards with a young team, with a young nucleus. Those guys would fit into that timeline. Obviously, O.J. Howard being an ex-Alabama member doesn't hurt because we've got a ton of those guys already on the roster. But, notwithstanding, bottom line is the asking price for those guys was too steep this offseason. And rightfully so. If I spend a first-round pick on a guy, I want at least no worse than a second-round pick in return. And in certain instances, I might want a first-round pick. I want to be greedy. I want a first-round pick. But if I'm Cleveland, if I'm Tampa, there's no way I'm giving these guys away. I'm not taking a third-round pick for a guy I spent a first-round pick on. And it's not because, it's one thing if you're taking a guy in the it's one thing if you're trading for a guy that hasn't proven himself, hasn't played well in this league, and you're down on him, and you don't see yourself keeping him past this season, and so instead of releasing him, you trade him. That's one thing. And guys around the league, teams around the league can sniff a situation like that out and understand how you feel about a player, and you won't extract all of that value. But in the case of O.J. Howard, in the case of the David Njoku, these guys are talented. And in the case of Njoku, it's been injuries. In the case of O.J. Howard, for whatever reason, the production may not be as high as they thought it was going to be. Whatever the case may be. If the asking price for those guys or some other tight end out there that this team may be smitten with comes down, maybe they'll be willing to, do business with someone for a tight end. And this is assuming our tight ends aren't any good. Now, that's a big assumption to make now. It's not far-fetched that our tight ends aren't any good because we don't think our tight end position is all that great right now, but they're really high on Logan Thomas, man. Ron continues to sing the praises of Logan Thomas. They love his athleticism. They think he just needed an opportunity to really shine, and they're going to give it to him. And so we're going to see what he's able to do. I got another name for you tonight. We're going to talk about him later on. I'm teasing it, but I'm not going to tell you who it is. But there's another guy that they're really, and Ron talked about it. So if you heard Ron speak, then you know who I'm talking about. There's another guy that they're really, really intrigued by. And one of the commenters brought him up a while back. And I didn't dismiss him, but I sort of kind of did. Okay. But when we talked about the tight end position as a whole, I brought him up and I said, look, this is a guy you got to consider as well. And they're giving him some reps. So, again, competition is the name of the game tonight. And that's a guy that's in the competition. So don't dismiss him either. So it's hard to say. I said all of that to say this. Hard to say if they go after someone at the trade deadline or not. First of all, usually you don't see teams that aren't winning. And I can't say if the Washington football team will be winning games and will be in a position to make a playoff push at the time of the trade deadline or not. I'd like to think that we won't be, but I could be wrong. This is going to be a very unique season. Who knows what happens? But if we're not very good, it's rare that you see a team that's not in the running for something trade for a player at the trade deadline. Now, we've seen more of this recently than we have in the past, where teams that aren't all that great are trading for players. Like in the case of the 49ers trading for Jimmy Garoppolo, they were horrible. They hadn't even won a game yet. Garoppolo comes in, they reel off 5 straight games, I believe, to finish up the season or whatever the case may be. And we've seen other teams trade for players. We saw it in baseball, even though this is a different sport. You know, the Mets trade for Stroman, and they weren't any good. And so we're seeing more teams kind of think ahead and say, hey, we may not be good this year, but this is a guy that can help us into the future. Maybe the Washington football team thinks that way with one of these tight ends out here. And if the asking price isn't too great, maybe they pull the trigger. But I think they're more interested in seeing what they have and letting these guys play. And if they don't love their tight end position at season's end, with all the cap space that they're going to have, with all the draft capital that they'll have, I think they'll more likely than not make a move at that position then pull the trigger on trading for someone. And then keep in mind, if you trade for a guy like a Njoku or a O.J. Howard, you also got to pay that guy. Whereas you get cheap labor in the draft for 5 years, you spend the first round pick 4 years in any round later than the first round. So highly unlikely to me that you see them pull the trigger on a tight end, but we'll see. It's hard to really say right now, but I don't. If I had to make an educated guess, I would say no trades for this football team, and not at the tight end position either. Thank you for the super chat. Protect Sports got another super chat. This one is from Mr. Laughing My Head Off. Thank you for the super chat, Mr. Laughing My Head Off, who writes, been following training camp as close as possible. Marcus Baugh getting a lot of praise from Ron. And remember, he was with Carolina last year, 6'5", 250, plays like a receiver. Keep an eye on him. Well, you just spoiled my surprise, Mr. Laughing My Head Off, because that was a guy I was going to spotlight tonight. A little bit later on in the program. I just teased him when I said there's another tight end that has been getting a lot of run with the ones and has been getting a lot of praise from Rivera and company. And that's who I was talking about, Marcus Baugh. So you stole my thunder there, but that's exactly who I was going to bring up. And someone brought him up like a month ago. When we were talking tight end, someone was like, yo, don't forget about Marcus Baugh. And I'm like, yeah, Marcus Baugh from Ohio State, right? Yeah, that's cool. All right, and I just moved on. Like, I wasn't really too intrigued by him at the time, but, I was more intrigued with the ex-UCLA product that they had on the roster than I was Marcus Baugh. But as you mentioned, and I think I did bring this up when we were talking to tight ends, Marcus Baugh was in Carolina on their practice squad. So he is a guy familiar with what they're doing. He is a guy that they're familiar with. And he's been getting some run, man. They like this kid a lot more than I think we've been led to believe. Excuse me. And I think this is a guy that you cannot discount. This is someone that we weren't talking about. We were talking about Sprinkle. And we were talking about Hale Henches. And we were talking about Thad Moss. And we were talking about Logan Thomas. But we weren't talking about Marcus Baugh. And I think it's time we start talking about Marcus Baugh a lot more, because this is a guy that's getting some run. And I'm not just talking about any old run. I'm talking first team rep run. And that's important. And I know it's a lot of platooning going on and a lot of guys are getting first team reps, but there's a lot of guys not getting first team reps too. And he's not one of them. He's getting in when Dwayne and the starting offensive line and the starting defense and all these guys are in. He's getting meaningful reps, and they're intrigued by his athleticism. So he didn't go to Ohio State for no reason. So this is a guy that don't sleep on him. And I'm glad you brought him up, even though I was going to talk about him later on. I'm glad you brought him up, Mr. Laughing My Head Off, because that is a guy that definitely has been impressing in camp, and I am intrigued by him now more than I ever have been before in the past, seeing that this guy is getting the kind of reps and listening to Ron talk about him and how this guy is an athlete and how they really like some of the things that he is doing. So thank you for bringing that up. And we'll still talk about him a little bit later on in the show as well. But thank you for the super chat, Mr. Laughing My Head off.
Louie.